All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we are joined by Marsha Anderson, who's the Vice President of Publishing and Executive Editor at the White House Historical Association, a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that supports the museum operations of the White House. And she's also a member of the tribe, having graduated in 1983 as an art history major. And she's going to speak to us tonight about the history of the White House Historical Association. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to doing this talk. And can everybody hear me okay? I'd love to tell you more about the White House Historical Association and its scholarly press, which I've managed now for almost 25 years. The White House is, of course, the home and the office of the president, but it also holds a significant fine and decorative arts collection, which belongs to the American people. And it is furnished with a growing collection of centuries-old pieces associated with previous presidents and their families. The White House Historical Association, where I work, helps to fund the acquisition and preservation of these historic furnishings and artworks, including official portraits of the presidents and first ladies. This is a picture of the portraits of President and Mrs. Ford being accepted for the collection. As Maggie said, we are a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan educational organization with offices right across Lafayette Park from the White House. Since our founding in 1961, we have published books for the purpose of enhancing the public's understanding and enjoyment of the White House. And the proceeds from the sales go towards expanding and maintaining the White House's permanent collection. The story of the association's founding is pretty well known, particularly Mrs. Kennedy's work to create a living museum at the White House. But this is really the best place for me to start to tell the story of the organization where I've worked for so many years. Jacqueline Bouvier was 11 years old when she first toured the White House in April 1941 with her mother. She was disappointed and later recalled, "From the outside, I remembered the feeling of the place, but inside, all I remember is shuffling through. There wasn't even a booklet you could buy." In a sense, it was perfectly reasonable for the future First Lady to assume that she would find a guidebook to refer to as she toured the White House rooms. Inexpensive illustrated guides like those seen here were commonplace at museums large and small in the United States and abroad at that time. Nevertheless, when Mrs. Kennedy toured the rooms with her mother in 1941, the White House was primarily a home and an office, not yet thought of as a museum. There was no curatorial staff to write authoritative descriptions of the artwork and furnishings, and the White House collection itself was not yet considered permanent. Furnishings often came and went just as first families came and went. 20 years later, when Mrs. Kennedy returned as First Lady, tourists continued to shuffle through by the thousands during posted opening hours. In the time since her childhood visit, the White House had been gutted and rebuilt during Harry S. Truman's presidency. It was modernized and structurally sound. But there was still no guide for a visitor to reference and almost no historic or antique objects to see. Essentially, the rooms were furnished with reproductions by B. Altman Department Store, acquired at the time of the Truman renovation back in 1952. Determined to change that situation, the new First Lady announced her ideas in a September 1961 article in Life magazine. Hugh Sidey, the journalist for Time magazine, who helped Mrs. Kennedy publish that article, later recalled that the work on that piece began when he was awoken from a blissful Sunday afternoon nap to take a phone call from President Kennedy. The president said, "Hugh, Jackie has this idea of turning the White House into a living museum, of redoing the White House and getting original furniture and paintings that are still available back. So the White House reflects the time of Jefferson and Monroe and the others." Jackie came on the phone and explained, "I want to do something special with the White House. It is such a beautiful old building. It is so bound up in our history. We need to bring it back to the way the founders envisioned." By the time the article was released, the wheels for Mrs. Kennedy's plan were in motion. The first White House curator was at work. The White House Fine Arts Committee had been established to advise on the restoration. A public law had been passed ensuring that the house would have a permanent museum collection. And the newly formed White House Historical Association had undertaken the guidebook as its first project, the proceeds of which would fund the new acquisitions for the White House. The National Geographic Society lent its staff and photographers to manage the production of the guide for the new association, which would not have its own publications department until I was hired 37 years later. Mrs. Kennedy herself was the editor. The White House and Historic Guide was presented to the Kennedys on June 28, 1962. It was filled with color illustrations and room-by-room descriptions of White House decor and furnishings. It would serve, as Mrs. Kennedy had hoped, to tell the dramatic story of the White House and its occupants, and help Washington tourists to understand it better. The public was hungry for such a book, and several 100,000 copies sold within a year. Today, more than 5 million copies have sold. The Historic Guide would mark the beginning of White House history as a unique field of study. It was the first and, for its only comprehensive published work on the history of the White House and its collections. On November 4th of this year, the association celebrated its 60th anniversary. We've matured into a nationally recognized independent publisher with more than 60 titles produced to date, as well as a quarterly magazine in its 63rd issue. Publications are a tangible representation of the association's mission to enhance understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment of the historic White House. Our titles cover a broad range of subjects related to the history of the President's house, from general interest to highly focused. This is a book I was just telling Maggie about last year that has a cheeseburger on the cover. It's a memoir of one of the President Bush's chefs in it. It sold tremendously well, which made me happy, of course, for financial reasons, but a little bit sad too that the history books couldn't quite keep up with the cheeseburger. It's one of our best-selling titles. We've published books on the historic White House neighborhood, the White House gardens, the Fine and Decorative Arts collection, and the presidents and first ladies who've lived there over the years. We published architectural histories and works that focus on the global context of the White House as the home and office of our nation's head of state. The list includes titles that appeal to children, history buffs and art lovers, connoisseurs and curious amateurs, scholars and tourists. The White House Historical Association also publishes the White House History Quarterly, now in its 63rd issue, which features scholarly yet approachable history. Margaret Stroley wrote a wonderful article for us last year on New Year's traditions at the White House, and we welcome ideas for potential articles on a wide range of topics. Although the association's first project was a book, today the association's programs have broadened beyond publishing. In 2011, we became co-steward with the National Trust for Historic Preservation of the historic Stephen Decatur House on Lafayette Square. The Decatur House is now the home of our National Center for White House History. Our robust retail offerings are featured in 3 brick and mortar shops, the White House Visitor Center on 1450 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House History Shop pictured here at 1610 H Street Northwest, and in the east wing of the White House itself, which was where the first guidebook was sold. And we also have an online shop at shop.whitehousehistory.org. Many of you may be familiar with our popular official White House Christmas ornament program, which began in 1981. We host educational programs and scholarly symposia on a wide variety of topics. We have an annual Teacher Institute and a digital library and many other educational resources. Details can be found on our website at whitehousehistory.org. Today is From the Start. The proceeds from the sale of the association's books and products are used to fund the acquisition of historic furnishings, assist in the preservation of the public rooms, and further the association's educational mission. If you're in the area, I hope you will stop by our shop at 1610 H Street during our holiday book week to meet our authors and have a book signed. The schedule is available on our website. And this year, because of COVID, we've gone from having a one-day event with many authors to a series of lunchtime book signings organized by theme. So we have a day for cookbooks and a day for children's books and a day for furnishings books, just to keep the crowds a little bit smaller. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes this year, but I hope to see you all there. And I wanted to give you all my email address too, in case you'd like to contact me. It's manderson@whha.org. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as well.
All right, if people have questions, we can do it through video, or we could also do it through the chat function, whichever makes people more comfortable.
I can start, Maggie, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, hi, Marcia. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. I've my family's been collecting the ornaments for a while, so that was a lot of fun to see that presentation. Yeah.
Good to hear.
Yes. I was going to ask kind of what brought you to that association, and kind of how'd you go from your William and Mary degree to working at the association?
Sure. Well, it wasn't anything that I could have planned. I knew when I was at William and Mary that I loved art history. I struggled trying to decide whether or not to major in education or art history, because I, wanted to teach. And I was also really interested in history. I loved, being in that historic setting at William and Mary. And I had a lot of interest, that for me, the association has allowed me to combine. So it's been kind of magical. I started my, after I left William and Mary, I got a degree in museum education and went to the Smithsonian Institution for my first job. But what happened there, because it was the early 80s, we were transitioning from typewriters to computers, and the first word processor was delivered. And I kind of just took to it, and pretty soon people were asking me to do whatever they needed to do on the computer, because a lot of people were nervous about computers. But in doing that, I learned a lot about online publishing, and went on and got another, a couple of certificate kinds of degrees in publications production, and sort of evolved to doing museum publishing. My next job was with the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, which is just a long way of saying the Association for Art Conservators, which I loved very much because it was, again, a chance to combine my interest in art and history and teaching. I think it was a small organization. I started to grow a little bit tired of it. And, back then, this is in the sort of middle 90s, I know things have changed a lot, but back then when you wanted another job, you just wrote letters. And I wrote a letter to the White House Historical Association, just a letter. And I said, I'd be interested in any positions you might have. And I was lucky in that the president of the association wrote me a letter back in the mail and said, call and make an appointment with me. And I did. And he invited me to lunch with Robert Breeden, who was the first person to produce the guidebook. He worked with Mrs. Kennedy on the first edition back in the 60s, and they told me that they were, looking to establish the in-house publications department, and told me lots of wonderful anecdotal stories about the production of the guidebook. And I was thrilled, because it was sort of the ultimate chance to combine so many interests. And so that's how it kind of happened. Like I said, I don't think it's anything that I could have planned for, but I feel fortunate that the opportunity came to me.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Or I can go with some of the questions that I have. Marsha, I'd want to know, do you have any, obviously it might be like children and you can't pick a favorite, but do you have any particular publications that you've worked on that you're particularly fond of?
Well, you're right, and that it's hard to pick a single favorite, but I have a very sentimental attachment to the guidebook because I've learned so much about it. And I've worked on, I guess I'm coming up on my 7th edition. And when I started, I was lucky to have the chance to, meet Robert Breeden and talk to him about his experiences. And I've been, kind of in awe of what Mrs. Kennedy did, her foresight and her creativity, and what she brought to her role as First Lady as such a young woman at 31. And she really transformed the White House into the living museum that she thought it should be. And she said, everything should have a reason for being there. And today it does. And having the chance to work on, a single title that has that kind of a history for so long is a really special thing to me. And then I guess, as far as the other books go, my favorites are probably the ones that I'm working on at the time. Because there's so many topics, and it never gets boring. We've done books on music in the White House, wine in the White House, in addition to kind of the obvious things on art and decorative arts. And they all just sort of, the stories become a part of me, and they're part of my life too. So I feel sentimental about all of them. I think probably mostly about the guidebook because of its history.
So I have a sort of open-ended question. First of all, thank you. That was so interesting to see. What would you say is either the most unusual or most surprising thing that is part of the White House sort of historical collection that people wouldn't think of?
Well, of course, there's, the furnishings that you would imagine, the works by the greatest American artists. The focus is on collecting works by American artists, and then, the best furniture makers in America. But we've published for a long time sort of simple biographical books on the presidents and the first ladies, which were kind of phasing out because, back in the 60s, the information wasn't available with a couple of clicks on the internet. And, it really wasn't as political to try to tell a a biography of a president or first lady in a simple way. So we're phasing out those books and rewriting them from the perspective of what we can do best. So we're telling the story about what each president and first lady did, contributed to the White House collection, or how they might have impacted the White House architecture. And we're illustrating these books with a lot of things that I'd never seen before that are really interesting. The small things, like Dolly Madison had a pin with hair. I know that's a whole field of study that some people specialize in, but a hairpin. I think there's a ring from Ulysses S. Grant. Pipe, somebody's pipe. The little personal things I think are fascinating, and not things that get published, because there's really not a niche that they fill in any of our other books. So I think that'll be a kind of a neat place to see some unusual things in the White House collection. Now they do have really strict guidelines for what they collect. So unless it kind of meets the criteria of the White House Fine Arts Committee for being, the finest possible example to add to the collection, it's not going to make it in the collection. So there's not a lot of ordinary stuff, but it's all very special. But those things that I think we'll be publishing soon, those personal things, might have some of the biggest surprises in them.
So if I could ask a question, I'm TJ Holland, class of '87. I'm the curator of a historic house museum around the corner from you at 1801 F Street, the Dackler Bacon House. And we're part of the consortium for the neighborhood of the president. And we've been working in cooperation with you on some aspects of you were talking about telling stories that weren't the presidents and first ladies, some of the other stories. So looking into the enslaved population of the neighborhood of the president. And I'm wondering, you were talking about upcoming publications. I know quite a lot of that has been on the website, and our house historian has worked to publish some things on your website. Is there a publication that we can look to in the future on that topic?
Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with a couple of our books, The White House of Stone, that came out about 4 or 5 years ago, which really focuses on the Scottish stonemasons. Right. And then this year we released a book on James Hoban that tells the story of the Irish architect of the White House. And then the third book in that trilogy will be the story of the enslaved laborers who worked not only on the White House, but in the White House neighborhood. We see those 3 books as a trilogy, and they're in the planning stages. We were actually just talking about the timing of it yesterday. I expect that book will be out in 2023. We're being careful to give the historians enough time to do all the research they need to do, because it's really an emerging field of study. And right now I know they're publishing a lot on our website, and in terms of putting it in a bound book, that's definitely on our schedule, and it'll be the next book in that trilogy.
That's great to hear. Thanks.
Yeah, we want to get it right, so a lot of times we do things slowly so that we can get them right. And I think that's one of the advantages of being a smaller independent publisher. Sometimes we'll delay a project if something new is discovered, or if historians need more time. I think that's a real luxury. I know, a for-profit publisher wouldn't be able to do what we do, but I think that really helps us maintain the quality that we look for, and the authority that we want to our books to present. So right now the best place is the website, but before long we'll be publishing that book on the neighborhood.
That's great news. And since you brought it up, I will say, as a trustee of the Washington St. Andrews Society, that book on the Scots Masons was very, very well done and well appreciated across the Scottish American community here in DC.
That's great to hear. You know, I don't know if you ever knew William Seal, but he was the author of that book, and a historian that I worked with on the association's publications for more than 20 years. He was the author of The President's House, and really, you know, a real pioneer in the history of in the study of White House history.
So another question I had was, what do you, working as you do in Lafayette Square, do you have a particular, well, obviously now with the pandemic, you might not be there as much. Do you have a particularly favorite time of year or season in the President's neighborhood?
Well, I'm not sure if I can answer that for me. The thing that's funny when you're working on publications in a quarterly magazine is sometimes you forget what year you're in and what season you're in, because you're always working towards the next deadline, and time is weird. And sometimes I'll come out the front door and I'll be like, oh, it's summer. But what I really love about being in that neighborhood is listening to the bells at St. John's Church. I like to have my window open just enough so I can hear the bells. It's just a beautiful sound that makes me feel connected to the neighborhood, you know.
Yeah, St. John's is beautiful. I went inside one time about I think a month and a half before the pandemic. It was an event that White House Historical Station did. I think it was David Rubenstein and Lonnie Bunch of Smithsonian.
Yeah, it's nice to be in, well, you know, it was originally a residential neighborhood, and that's just a really nice feeling as a workspace to be in something that's more of a, you know, comfortable, homey kind of setting. It I've worked in office buildings too, with, you know, going up and down the elevator, but I much prefer the townhouse on Lafayette Square. It's a very comfortable place to be. And it's interesting too, TJ probably sees this, that, you know, we really are neighbors, I think. It's kind of nice to know the people who work in the different buildings, Blair House and Dolly Madison House and St. John's. You know, you get to know them over time, and it really does feel like a neighborhood.
Agreed. If you could comment on your experience there working, and for all intents, I know your work hours living to a degree on Lafayette Square, being part of that neighborhood, what was your experience during the late unpleasantness? There was quite a lot of social uproar that was centered around Lafayette Square. I know that our house had the shutters drawn, and our caretaker was in real concern during the time of the riots after George Floyd and in the clearing of Lafayette Square. I know that the Decatur house was directly affected. What was your experience during that time?
Well, you know, we were working from home, and it was terrifying to see on the news. I think I first saw the damage to Decatur house on the news. And, you know, the fire that was set at St. John's, it was a really terrifying feeling, especially, you know, I worked in that building for more than 20 years, and I felt like the park was a part of me. And we had done just the year before a book called To Live on Lafayette Square, which gives the history of all the residential homes and how they evolved, who lived there, the ones that are still standing, and yay, you got it. And so, you know, all of that was in my head too. how special those places were, and, could they be threatened or what would happen. It was terrifying, but I'd have to say that, looking back on it, I thought I was fortunate to work at a place with such wonderful leadership. Stuart McLaurin, who's our president, I think handled the situation very carefully and very well and respectfully. They documented the graffiti that was on the building. And he even published it in the quarterly, in the back of the quarterly, pictures of it. They took care of the building. Of course, we, as co-stewards with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, it's our job to be sure the building is taken care of. But I think he handled a stressful situation really well. During those weeks, we had almost daily calls with the managers. So we all kept in touch with each other. People went down, met with the trust, conferred about how to handle, the damage, reinforced the windows, took down things that they could take down, like the historic shutters that were original to Decatur House. And, we got through it. I think with a lot of things, like looking back in another 5 or 10 years, it'll be easier, once we've absorbed it all and reflected on it, to be more articulate about it. But, now, and I think all of us that work at the association, we're just waiting and waiting for those fences to come down. Those tall fences that blocked off the park that seemed to go on forever and ever. But I guess they came down in May or June. And so now, when I go out the front door of the building and walk in the park, I just feel like it's such a, privilege, and I appreciate it so much more. Yeah. We just published an issue of White House History Quarterly on 9/11, looking back 20 years on the evacuation of the White House on September 11th. And it was something that we purposely waited 20 years to write about, so that we could get that perspective. It would have been, I think, hard to tell that story.
What's the title, if you don't mind? I work at the World Bank and was there that same day, and that was the moment that we evacuated from the bank, was when the CNN reporter was saying, standing there on the North Lawn, we've been told to leave the North Lawn, and we see White House staff evacuating. That's when the World Bank also chose to send our folks home. So vivid memories, and I'd be very interested. What's the title of that publication?
Well, you can find it on our website. It's a White House History Quarterly number 62. It's called September 11th, 2001. We just gave it a very simple title. And of course, you're welcome to email me if you can't find it, and I'll send you the link. But that was, kind of a heart-wrenching story to tell, because I was there, I saw the evacuation too. And what we did with that issue was publish for the first time the oral histories that the curator's office had taken from the White House employees who evacuated on September 11th. So it felt like it felt like the time was right, and their memories were really very moving about what they went through, being told, run for your life. And before cell phones, the world was really different, but all of those first person accounts are in that issue. So I'm happy to help you find it if you don't find it online.
Thanks.
I think Abby had a question.
Hi, Marcia. Thanks for the wonderful presentation.
Thank
I
you.
was curious if any of the books are available in an audiobook format, not just in a hard copy print, just because I know some people who are, or a group that's an organization in the area who are visually impaired, and they might be interested in learning about what's out there.
Yeah, the To Live on Lafayette Square is available as an audiobook. I can send you a link to that. Looking forward, we'd like to do more audiobooks. I was telling Margaret a little while ago that we went into a doomsday budget. So a lot of those projects got delayed because of COVID, but I think a lot of our books are perfect for audio versions, and I'd like to do more of that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Something that really struck me about your presentation was just as you were saying how involved First Lady Jackie Kennedy was in kind of the creation of the association and bringing all of the artwork with a purpose into the White House. I was curious, in recent times, have any of the first families, the presidents, first ladies, have any of them kind of stood out to you and taken a particular interest in some of the furnishings and artwork in the White House?
Yeah, so the association traditionally works with the First Lady on the acquisitions of new works of art and on the refurbishments of the staterooms and the public rooms. So each First Lady, in my experience, has an area of the White House that they take a special interest in. Usually the rooms they call it refurbishment, not redecoration, but basically, after some time, the rooms are often rethought sorry, I just turned on my other computer, are often rethought with the help of the curator's office and the White House Committee for Fine Arts. And so it would be that committee, the First Lady, and the White House Historical Association sort of working together. So you can see, you can still see Mrs. Kennedy's ideas in the staterooms, but over time they've evolved. Sometimes the wall coverings, have changed. New pieces are brought into the rooms. The paintings and artwork are sometimes shifted around a little bit. Mrs. Clinton took an interest in refurbishing the Blue Room. And so the Blue Room really reflects the work that she did there. Mrs. Obama took an interest in bringing more modern art, contemporary art into the White House. The first late 20th century works of art were brought in and hung in the family dining room. There's still her concept for that room is still there with the Alma Thomas, Rauschenberg, Lichtenstein, Albers are all in the family dining room. Let's see, Mrs. Trump worked on the diplomatic reception room, put a new carpet in. Mrs. Bush had a very kind of famous project of refurbishing the Lincoln bedroom, and it still reflects her work. And it was fascinating because, I showed you a picture of some department store furnishings that were there when Mrs. Kennedy came. And with the Lincoln bedroom, Mrs. Bush took an interest in it, and they actually did a lot of research to discover what the wall coverings and carpets look like during Lincoln's time, and recreated those. So that's a kind of a masterpiece, I think, of recreating the feel of the Lincoln era in that room. So really, I think as you go through the White House, there's at least for me, or I'm sure for the curators who've been there a long time, you remember different first ladies in different parts of the house. And I think it was a quote from Mrs. Kennedy too that said, many first families have loved this house, and each of them have left something of themselves there. And I think that's really been true since the Kennedy administration. All the first ladies have, kind of embraced the association and partnered with us in the work. Mhm.
Great, thank you.
All right, does anyone else have anything they would like to ask? If not, we could wrap things up. Sure. Thank you, Marcia, for your time.
Oh, thank you. It was
if-
fun. And please, if anybody thinks of anything, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to email me.
And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you so